The referendum, the result was a victory for Australia. It was a decisive rejection of racial division, and it was a rejection of the creation of a special class of Australians in our Constitution. Now, unsurprisingly, the losing side is looking to blame everyone else for their failures. It was their failure because the Yes campaign was led by people who have failed Aboriginal people for decades. And yet somehow they thought the Australian people would give them more power and more authority because that is precisely what they wanted. One example of that is the Prime Minister himself. I mean, he has been in Parliament for decades. He's held very senior positions for much of that time, and he more or less admitted that he and his other time servers in the Parliament have little to show for the billions that they have showered on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people every single year for many decades now. What about the Minister, Linda Burney? She teared up at the referendum failure last night, and I reckon she should be crying too over her campaign performance. Quite frankly, it was woeful. I mean, she needed help to answer even the most basic questions on the policy of which she was in charge. And she always seemed to retreat to this folder of talking points, just regurgitating them ad nauseum, whether they were relevant to the actual question asked or not. Little wonder Australians didn't know much about what was going on. The Minister and the Prime Minister didn't seem to know much either. And then there were the interventions of Noel Pearson and Marcia Langton and Thomas Mayo and the like. Now, these people have all been embroiled in ATSI politics for decades, and they all have a spectacular record of underachievement. And yet somehow, someone in the Yes camp thought that having them call no voters pejorative names or threatening to withhold welcome to country ceremonies was going to be a political winner and would swing votes their way. We even saw a high-flying Aboriginal role model called regular Australians racists because they were participating in the democratic process and made a decision to reject racial division in our Constitution. That's a role model. And the Yes mob, they couldn't even agree on what the Uluru Statement from the Heart was or what it actually meant. The whole thing was a shambles. And as it was a shambles, the campaign deserved to fail. But not just because of the hopelessness of those involved, but because the entire proposal would have been terrible for the country. But now the navel-gazing and the blame game continues. And there's even been a period of mourning declared by the Aboriginal elites who are off licking their wounds. Quite frankly, these elites have become a running joke, and I think they should all remove themselves from the Aboriginal industry that has enriched them so grandly. If you actually really want to change the outcomes for Indigenous people, then let's put a stop to the grift. Let's put a stop to the excuses. Let's stop the immoral industry attached to sit-down money. Let's stop the profiteers, and then stop the us and them divide. Unfortunately, that shows no signs of happening. Last night, the Prime Minister displayed what I'm going to claim is his continuing shallowness when he asked this question.
Debates about the length of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, that no one in this room. Is there anyone in this room thinks it was more than what it was?
Does anyone believe it was more than what it was? Well, of course it was what it was. I mean, what does all that babble really even mean? The Uluru Statement from the Heart was about voice, it was about treaty, and it was about truth-telling. But the Prime Minister repeatedly said it wasn't. He claimed it was a one-page document. He was contradicted again and again and again by people on the Yes campaign. And now he tells us it is, or it was, what it was. This is incredibly mind-numbing from a bloke who's leading the country. And incredibly, during the campaign, the Prime Minister admitted he hadn't even read the entire statement. And yet, he's taken a line from his keynote delivery in defeat and says, you know, it is what it is. It wasn't pretending to be anything else. He and his team had no idea what they were advocating for through this referendum, And now they're still demonstrating a complete lack of self-awareness.